In the serene wilderness of East Idaho, nestled amongst the dense pines and the quiet whispers of nature, lies the Timber Creek Campground. This remote location, known for its tranquility and untouched beauty, became the setting of a baffling mystery that started on a warm summer day, July 10th of 2015. The Kunz family, seeking a break from the routine of city life in Idaho Falls, decided on an impromptu trip to the great outdoors. With their 2-year-old son, Deorr Kunz Jr., affectionately called Little Man by his parents, Jessica Mitchell and Vernal Deorr Kunz Sr., the family packed up their gear for a simple weekend of fishing and relaxation. Accompanying them were Deorr's great-grandfather, Robert Walton, and a family friend, Isaac Reinwand, each bringing years of camping experience, but unaware of the looming tragedy. Upon arriving at the campground, the group set about making their temporary home. The parents busied themselves with setting up camp chairs and igniting a fire in the pit, all while laughing and sharing stories. Nearby, the creek added a soothing soundtrack to their activities. Walton, perhaps feeling the weight of his years, decided to rest inside the trailer, leaving the door open to stay connected to the group. Isaac wandered off to fish, drawn by the lure of the stream's promise. In these peaceful moments, Deorr, with his blonde shaggy hair and innocent eyes, was the epitome of a toddler's curiosity. Dressed in a camouflage jacket and blue pants, he seemed just another part of the natural tapestry, a small figure amidst the vastness of the forest. The last detail of normalcy was his attire, cowboy boots, a size too big, known to slip off his tiny feet, a crucial detail later remembered amidst the chaos. As the afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows, Jessica and Vernal informed Walton of their plan to explore the nearby area, assuming he would keep a watchful eye on Deorr. However, a critical misunderstanding unfolded. Walton thought Deorr had followed his parents and Reinwand down to the creek. The stage was set, not for a peaceful continuation of a family outing, but for a disappearance that would perplex and haunt all involved.
At some point, before we were all as a group, as we started to leave the campground, I remember all of us being together. Whatever happened,
Bob.
right.
Bob wasn't there.
Bob was at the stayed at the camp.
Okay.
As far as I know, I thought baby Deorr was still behind us, and I was showing Jessica. Like when I went to go show them the fishing hole, like I went down there and showed Jessica where the fishing hole is, and I assumed that Deorr and his dad were right behind me.
Okay.
Or just behind us. They just taking them a little bit to catch up.
And at what point did you and Deorr Sr. and Jessica split up? They went somewhere else and you went somewhere, you said earlier, right? You came down the creek closer to the campground and left them up there?
Yeah.
And so...
I did. I don't know, it was like 5-10 minutes. I showed them, I think it must have been 5-10 minutes.
Okay.
After I did that, I walked towards camp, and I went to another fishing hole to fish. And I was down there fishing for a while, and that's when I noticed Bob was up there on the ridge walking, pacing back and forth. So I asked him what was going on, and he said little Deorr is missing. And I was like, what?
The mystery deepened when, after some time, Jessica returned to check on Deorr. The casual question to her grandfather, "Where's little Deorr?" was met with confusion and the chilling realization that no one knew where the boy was. The shock that rippled through the camp was the first wave of panic that would soon engulf the entire community. This miscommunication marked the beginning of a search that would grow in scale and desperation. As minutes turned into hours without any sign of Deorr, the family's distress escalated to a full-blown emergency. The serene setting of the campground, once a place of joy and laughter for the Kunz family, had morphed into a perplexing mystery, hiding in its shadows that seemed as deep as the woods himself. As the realization that little Deorr was missing settled in, the calm of the Timber Creek Campground fractured into chaos. The family's initial search, a frantic calling of Deorr's name through the thickets and trees, quickly escalated. Jessica and Vernal, panic-stricken, split up to cover more ground, their voices echoing off the dense forest canopy. Meanwhile, Robert Walton, despite his age and confusion over the boy's last known location, tried to retrace his steps, hoping to spot a glimpse of the camouflage jacket among the greens and browns of the woods.
What's the address of your emergency?
I'm actually camping in Leadworth, just outside of Leadworth.
Uh-huh.
My 2-year-old son, we can't find him.
How long has he been missing?
About an hour.
An hour?
Yeah.
Are you by water?
Yes.
Do you know which campground you're in?
It's Stone Reservoir, Timber Creek.
Stone Reservoir?
Yeah, or Timber Creek.
Hold on. We need search and rescue. Jessica? Jessica?
Yeah.
What's your son's name?
Or
Okay, what is he wearing?
he was wearing cowboy boots, a blue, pajama pants, and a camel jacket. And he's got shaggy blonde hair,
Is your husband calling too?
like all down where we were camping at, and we can't find him at all.
Okay, we need you to stay within cell service. We've got people going on the way.
Thank you.
The quiet afternoon was soon pierced by the sounds of sirens as local law enforcement arrived. Deorr's disappearance had turned from a family concern into an official search operation. The campground became a hub of activity, with officers coordinating with volunteer search teams. The landscape, once an idyllic backdrop for a family getaway, transformed into a sprawling, ominous puzzle where every tree and bush could be hiding secrets. Search teams fanned out from the campsite, calling out for Deorr, the sound of their efforts bouncing hauntingly in the open air. As they moved through the underbrush, the rustle of leaves underfoot seemed unnaturally loud. Search dogs were brought in, their handlers guiding them through the possible paths Deorr might have wandered. The dogs sniffed diligently, their behavior watched eagerly by everyone, each change in their demeanor sparking a flicker of hope or a sinking feeling of despair. The creek, with its gentle flow and slippery banks, posed a particular worry. Divers suited up and went into the cold, clear water, feeling their way beneath the surface for any sign of the child. Above them, drones buzzed, providing aerial views of the rugged terrain, their cameras scanning the landscape for any anomaly that might be a small boy alone and afraid. As the sun began to set, the forest shadows grew longer and the temperature dropped. The light that once illuminated the campground now cast long, dark shadows, making the search efforts even more urgent. Portable lights were set up around the area, casting an eerie glow as the search continued into the night. Volunteers gathered around maps, their faces drawn and worried, discussing the next place to check. With each passing hour, the mystery of Deorr's whereabouts deepened. The initial theory that he might have simply wandered off seemed increasingly insufficient, as no trace of him was found. Speculation began to swirl among the search parties and the gathered media. Had Deorr been taken? Was there an accident that they had not yet uncovered? The lack of evidence only fueled more questions. The campground echoed with the murmur of urgent conversations and the distinct calls of searchers refusing to give up. The atmosphere was tense, with the fear of the unknown looming over the efforts of the search team, who combed through every inch of the surrounding area, driven by the hope of finding Deorr safe, but hindered by the growing realization that the forest might not give up its secrets so easily. The search for Deorr Kunz Jr. reached its most critical and intense moment nearly 4 days into the operation. The arrival of cadaver dogs, trained specifically to detect the scent of human remains, had brought a tense anticipation to the Timber Creek Campground. The atmosphere thickened with a mix of hope and dread as teams prepared for what the dogs might find. As the dogs began their work, moving methodically through the dense undergrowth that surrounded the campground, all other activities seemed to pause. Searchers, family members, and law enforcement officers watched in suspense silence, each step the dogs took charged with potential significance. The handlers led their canine partners with a calm efficiency, but the gravity of what they might discover weighed heavily on everyone's mind. Then, in a moment that felt both sudden and inevitable, one of the dogs alerted strongly near a patch of brush not far from where Deorr was last seen. The dog circled, sniffed aggressively, and sat down, a signal that something was there. The handler marked the spot and called over the radio for the investigative team. Heartbeats quickened and breaths were held as the area was cordoned off, the natural sound of the forest seeming to fall away until there was nothing but the soft murmur of the creek in the distance. The search team moved in with shovels at the site. Observers held their breath, hoping for any sign that might bring closure, but also fearing what might be uncovered. As the excavation continued, the tension was palpable, with each shovel of earth turned over bringing a mix of hope and heartache. After hours of meticulous work, the lead investigator stood up, turning to address the anxious crowd of onlookers. He held up a small object for all to see. It was not the discovery everyone feared. Instead, it was a bone. But immediately, there was a twist in the tale. Preliminary examination suggested it was not human. It was likely from an animal. This revelation brought a complex flood of relief and frustration. Relief that they had not found evidence of a tragic end for Deorr, but frustration because the mystery of his disappearance remained as dense as the forest around them. This moment marked the peak of the search efforts in both scale and emotional intensity. The campground, once a place of leisure and escape, had transformed into the epicenter of an agonizing mystery. The failure to find conclusive evidence left the search teams and the family in a state of suspended despair. Questions swirled like the leaves in the chilly wind. Where could Deorr be? What had happened to this little boy whose disappearance had captured the hearts and fears of so many? As the searchers packed up their tools and the crowd began to disperse, the forest seemed to reclaim its stillness, the shadows once again just shadows, hiding nothing, or so it seemed. The case remained open, the answers elusive, and the pain of not knowing continued to haunt all who were involved. The climax of the search had passed, but the resolution of Deorr's story was yet to be found, leaving a lingering echo of the mystery in the cool mountain air. As the initial surge of activity following the inconclusive discovery by the cadaver dogs began to wane, the search for Deorr Kunz Jr. transitioned into a more subdued phase. The large teams of volunteers and the constant buzz of activity around the campground slowly dissipated, replaced by a quieter, more persistent investigation. Law enforcement continued their efforts, but with each passing day, the trail seemed to grow colder. The parents, Jessica and Vernal, faced increasing scrutiny. Their initial confusion and panic slowly turned into a deep, worrisome anxiety as they were questioned repeatedly by the police. The lack of new evidence meant that this investigation had to rely more on piecing together the family's activities and statements from the day Deorr disappeared. This meticulous process revealed inconsistencies in the timelines provided by the parents and the other adults on the trip, casting a shadow of doubt and suspicion over all their accounts. Meanwhile, private investigators hired by the family brought in their own theories and suspicions to the table, but they too found themselves mirrored in the complexities of the case. Each new theory seemed only to add more questions rather than providing answers. As they dug deeper, interviewing witnesses and re-examining evidence, their findings led to public statements that did not always align with the official police investigation, creating a confusing narrative for the public following the case. The media coverage, which had been frenzied during the initial days of the search, began to take on a more speculative tone. News reports frequently highlighted the mysterious aspects of the case, often focusing on the emotional torment of the family and the community's continued interest and involvement in finding Deorr. This sustained media attention kept the case in the public eye, but also pressured the investigators to pursue every possible lead, no matter how small or slight that it seemed. As weeks turned into months, the energy of the search dimmed. Search teams still returned to the campground periodically, driven by new tips or just a determined hope of finding something overlooked in a previous search. These efforts, however, felt more like rituals of hope than actionable leads. The community also remained engaged, holding vigils and creating memorials for Deorr. The small town was bonded by the tragedy, with residents continuing to support the family and each other, even as the mystery lingered like a heavy fog over their daily lives. Yet, beneath this communal solidarity, there were whispers, rumors that questioned every detail of the parents' version of events. This period of the investigation was marked not by the frantic activity of the initial search, but by a slow, grinding process of examination and re-examination, of waiting for a breakthrough that seemed increasingly unlikely to come. The mystery of Deorr's disappearance settled into the landscape of the campground, an unresolved shadow that lingered long after the search teams had packed up and gone. Years after Deorr Kunz Jr. vanished from the Timber Creek Campground, the case remained an open wound in the community and a haunting presence in the lives of everyone involved. Despite exhaustive searches, numerous interviews, and endless speculation, no conclusive evidence had emerged to provide closure or comfort to those left behind. In the small community near Deorr, Idaho, Deorr's disappearance had become a somber legend, a story whispered among locals and a reminder of the boy who just simply vanished. The campground itself had become a site for those who followed the case or found themselves touched by the family's struggle. People sometimes left toys or flowers near the site where Deorr was last seen, a small gesture to honor his memory and express hope, however faint. For Deorr's family, particularly his grandparents, the years did little to ease the agony of not knowing. His grandmother, Trina Clegg, remained a vocal presence in the media, her face lined with grief of the years without her grandson. Each anniversary of his disappearance prompted new interviews, where she repeated her resolve never to give up hope of finding Deorr or learning what happened to him. Her home bore the marks of the missing boy, with pictures of Deorr's bright smile and somber images from the search posters. Law enforcement officials periodically reviewed the case, each new sheriff or investigator pledging to look at the evidence with fresh eyes. Yet, despite these efforts, the mystery endured, each review seemingly only to deepen the puzzle. The file on Deorr Kunz Jr. grew thicker with reports and theories, yet remained painfully thin on answers. The theories about what happened to Deorr continued to circulate: abduction, an unfortunate accident, or something darker tied to the inconsistencies in the parents' account. Online forums and social media groups dedicated to the case often buzzed with amateur sleuths debating these theories, each new post striving to shed light on the cold trails left in the wake of the investigation. The impact of the case extended beyond the immediate family and community to touch a nationwide audience. Documentaries and true crime shows revisit this story regularly, drawing in viewers with eerie details and the interviews with the family members. Each retelling serves to underscore the haunting absence of resolution and the gripping pull of this unsolved mystery. Ultimately, the story of Deorr Kunz Jr. was one of absence and enduring mystery. The landscape of the Timber Creek Campground continued to bear silent witness to the unresolved fate of the little boy lost. The echoes of what might have happened to Deorr lingered in the mountain air, a haunting reminder that not all stories find their conclusion, leaving instead a lasting legacy of uncertainty and sorrow.